Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome back to day two of our symposium, Notes from the Digital Underground. We had a very invigorating first day, I thought, and I was a bit nervous about how some of these conversations would play out, and actually, I was quite inspired by kind of the range of what we saw, and I'm really excited that we'll have a chance to build on that today. I won't say anything more right now, but our first keynote for today will be by Nishant Shah, and Maya Indira Ganesh will be responding. I will briefly read out their bios, and then I'll invite Nishant up to take the stage. Nishant Shah is Associate Professor of Global Media and Culture at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, where he leads the Digital Narrative Studio and directs the MA in Global Communication. He's a faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard. His work spans digital technologies, feminist and queer theory, and global governance with a focus on the Global South. He leads the Generative AI Network with Dakila and IDRC and the Possible AI Speculative Technology Institute with Korea, and serves as a knowledge partner to the Feminist Internet Research Network with APC and the Take a Pause Fund with Oxfam Novib. Dr. Maya Indira Ganesh, who will be responding, is an assistant research professor and associate director at the Leverhulme Center for the Future of Intelligence at the University of Cambridge, UK. Motivated by feminist techno-scientific and participatory approaches, her research relates to the socio-technical adoption and value creation with AI in public spaces and public culture. Her book, Autocorrect, The Fantasies and Failures of AI Ethics and the Driverless Car, which I recommend you all read, is about the rhetorical, material, and epistemic leverage exerted by the narratives of ethics in technology and its implication for governance of human social relations, spaces, and bodies. Prior to academia, Ganesh spent a decade as a researcher activist working on gender justice, human rights, and digital freedom of expression in the global majority world. I'm very excited for this keynote. Nishant, please take it away.
All right. Good morning. Thank you. And I can't believe so many people showed up. I mean, it's Sunday morning. We almost missed it. Okay. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm trying out something new. I'm pretending to be an artist and a coder. So there is a possibility that a lot of things might go wrong in the visuals, but we will just take it and see how it goes. I'm going to set things up, start the timer, and try and keep myself within 45 minutes. Okay. Good. So yeah, I'm delighted and frankly slightly overwhelmed to occupy this position as one of the keynotes today because I think the symposium and the exhibition is filled with what can only be described as a powerhouse of thinkers and doers, makers, and the conversations that have happened yesterday have already been so rich and inspiring that it kind of sometimes feels like, what more do I have to say? So I'm very glad that I have written this keynote out, and it's based on a research paper that's actually coming into publication tomorrow. Like good academic papers, it was written 2 years ago, so it's very fresh. But I'm just glad that it's been written because otherwise I would have spent the whole of last night trying to rewrite it. As always, my love to the whole Khoj team, to Mila, and thanks to Maya Indira Ganesh, who has been a friend, a colleague, and a collaborator over many years, and agreed to do a response where she should actually be doing a keynote, and to all of you who are making these conversations possible. So let me begin with something that, again, as I said, is very fresh, because in 2023, the Future of Life Institute circulated a viral open letter signed by all the big names in the field of artificial intelligence, where they asked for a pause on future AI development to allow for human policy and regulation to catch up to the consequences of generative AI. Right? So, in this position paper titled Policy in the Pause, they argued that we do not really have a grasp on what questions to ask of generative AI because the models keep on evolving and changing at a very rapid pace. And their anxiety is not something that should be alien to us because there are multiple commonly heard discourses that we also participate in when it comes to Gen AI anxiety. in how AI will take our jobs, how AI is leading to misinformation, it's biased and will harm people at scale, that AI decision making removes accountability, and that it's aiding and abetting the entire surveillance industry in ways that are almost unimaginable. And while there is much to be said about the language, the narratives, the specific framing of these narratives, about who they benefit and who they are unsettling, that's not something I want to focus on for today. Because in the very breathless, astonished, almost shell struck responses of awe, fear, wonder, shock, and anxiety around generative AI, there is a set of questions which actually go unanswered. Because we are so busy marveling at the naturalization that we witness with generative AI through ChatGPT therapy bots, or mid-journey deepfakes, or replica-based synthetic humans, and creative producers that generate generic slop. So while all of these responses are real and tangible, I want to step away from them to focus on something else different, which is about how we organize and engage in politics and how generative AI is changing that. And I want to do that not by looking at Gen AI applications, but by identifying it as disrupting a specific form of digital informationality that we are so familiar with that we don't think about it, which is search. And my proposition is that if we want to understand the political futures of generative AI, we're going to first have to look at the political past of search based digital practices. Now, we can pretend that there are many search engines and many different modes of doing it, but as Shiva Vaidyanathan Pavupulli points out, we have lived and continue to live through the Googlization of everything. It might be useful to mark that the birth of Google and the emergence of search as a dominant form has been a significant paradigm within which our digital politicking has emerged. So, when Google's search engine became truly globally available, it offered a mission that sounded almost innocent: to sort, to index, and I quote, organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. It's possible in hindsight to show how Google's search was not just the organization of information, but the organization of systems of information, as René Ridgway would put it. These systems, which had infrastructure and economic value, were also used to assign value to human actions, right? Like in the case of PageRank. Shoshana Zuboff's powerful articulation of surveillance capitalism argues that Google's search engine is the imagined future where all human information can be extracted, mined, and monetized. So I'm doing just this scattered signposting just to emphasize that the emergence of search as the default mode of information access doesn't just change the nature of how information is produced and stored, but also changes the nature and purpose of the information thus retrieved, right? So Google search, in other words, does not just present or offer access to information. It performs the function of revealing information based on the query that the searcher offers. And there has been extraordinary work that has exposed the limitations, harms, and scaled problems of these search-based practices. I'm thinking of Sofia Nobel's work on structural bias, or Metasa and Torres Echeverry's work on fake news, work on information manipulation and profit-driven models favoring specific information arc, which isolate into what Wendy Chun calls network neighborhoods or filter bubbles, right? And you can look at the paper, I can do a shameless plug at the end, which is coming out next week, to have a detailed look at the literature. But I want to go back to arguing that these problems are engineered or informed by the search-based functions. And not surprisingly, the responses to these problems, especially in internet governance and policy work, have also been shaped by the search-based functions. If you look at like a broad range of responses to informational harms, you will immediately think about right to information, or transparency, or whistleblowing, or fact checking, or audits, disclosures, exposes. These are common sense political tools for and informed by the age of search, because their primary motivation is revelation. These problems and the responses to them, I'm suggesting, are all different versions of the same promise that search as a paradigm offered: that truth can be revealed, that revelation produces accountability, and that we have to position ourselves when we search as authors of revelation. Ask, and it shall be revealed has quickly become the default of the times that we live in. To search, to reveal, and to believe in the information that is revealed, this is our daily habitual interaction online. Search then is not merely an act of querying, but an act of authorship. And if there was ever an author function for Web 2.0, revelation would be it. Search is not just an arrangement of information and systems of managing it, but the production of a subject, the searcher, if you will, who engages in political actions where the end point is revelation. And while search can be overwhelming and also shaped by algorithmic curation, it has the potentials to be mapped out, right? So technically, it's possible as a searcher to look at all the pages of a Google search query, evaluating for yourself the validity and relevance of all the results, rather than relying on Google's own valuing of the top results. As the famous internet meme goes, page 2 of a Google search result is the best place to hide a dead body. Right? Even though we might not look at the entire set of information revealed, there is a conviction in the performance of this revelation that if needed, we could. Right? Search-based systems make themselves reliable and trustworthy by not only revealing the results, but also revealing the pathway to determining the value of the revealed, which is co-produced with the searcher. The search query reveals, as it travels through digital liminality, to retrieve a precisely marked predictive set of information, and while it reveals it to us as knowledge, it also opens the possibility of tracing this journey and correcting or modifying it. I am in no way suggesting that search is benign. Sophia Noble's wonderful work on algorithms of oppression shows structural bias. Alexandra Juhasz and I wrote a book called Really Fake, where we've argued about the propensity for fakeness in search engines. Wendy Chun has revealed how search-driven results manipulate information through metrics like relevance. And Padmini Ray Murray, in her analysis of digital databases, has seen how dominant modes of information value are reinforced by these search practices. As we search and are revealed to, questions about who gets revealed, how they get revealed, what information is used to reveal them, and the ways in which these practices can be gamed and engaged with to create new narratives of events have been part of the searcher as the author function. We see the implications of these search-based functions in how fake news can go online, how false information can persist, how digital information that's never forgotten creates like these non-agential narratives of those under attack, and how data trails and information archives can be weaponized. So if the author function of revealing has been a large part of Web 2.0 and has become such an integral part of our everyday digitality, it means that it also has direct consequences about the way we organize the politics of this information. And if you look at the last couple of decades of internet governance and policy making, we've consistently argued for the capacity to search, access, the building of search databases, infrastructure, the transparency of search algorithms, accountability, and standardization of search queries and practices, which is questions of equity and different forms of forming of protocol. And these are all considered to be the gold standards or the holy grail of providing safeguards, building guardrails, creating oversight, and infrastructuring verification and fact-checking mechanisms. I'll tell you something that's not in that simulation. It's not working. And it's not been working for a while. So in the midst of all of this, when generative AI comes to cause so much anxiety, it might be interesting to realize where this anxiety is coming from, because it's not coming only from this new application. It's coming from a longer history of things not working even within the search-based paradigm. And I'm going to kind of just, again, signal this through 3 anecdotes, which I think are fairly familiar, but it's good to just revise them once again, just to see what's happening. Right, so in May 2023, Steven Schwartz, representing Avianca Airlines in front of a Manhattan federal judge, confessed to using ChatGPT to submit a 10-page brief that was replete with relevant court decisions which were nowhere to be found because they were completely fabricated. I mentioned yesterday that I teach undergraduates. This is not new. It should be familiar to all of us as we increasingly find students sending in assignments with sources that are hallucinated. Generative AI has been caught lying to us and lying about us, as Jonathan Turley, who is a law professor in California, found out when his name appeared on a list of sexual predators without any credible or present complaints, but because ChatGPT decided that he sounded like the profile who would be a sexual predator, right? Kate Crawford, whose work with Vlad Jeweler is actually something we teach and have been teaching for a while in our classes, calls these made-up things hallucinations. right? And Arvind Narayan characterizes these forms of generative AI as bullshit generators. But this is not an accidental problem. Because as OpenAI co founder John Schulman tells in an interview, AI systems don't understand fabrication because they are not models that are trying to find evidence to your question, they are trying to find answers for your query. A self learning AI system is not designed to know or to think, and sometimes it might not know the answers, but it can think the answers, which is to say that AI hallucinations are part of the job, a part of the feature, and not a bug. The second example is about Kevin Rose, a New York Times reporter who narrates a wonderfully creepy story of Microsoft's Bing trying to convince Kevin that he should kill his wife, leave her, and settle down with the AI instead. In our book, Really Fake, we've asked the question, who contrives the moment of truth? Because for a generative AI system, the truth is not a question of where, but when. Gen AI models are models of simulation. And that's something that Ashish already brought up in the opening yesterday when he said that there is already a significant shift from representation to simulation that we are witnessing, and we no longer witness it, we now experience it. Right? So Gen AI models are models of simulation, which means that in the now, if something seems to be a logical thing to say, it will say it without context, without continuity, and without any attention to the response that is given to it. So, Gen AI is not sequential but exponential in nature, and hence it constantly produces utterances which, if you hold it accountable for them, it would have no knowledge of them. So, forget taking responsibility, it doesn't even know that it has said what it has said. You think we are turning neurotic in the 21st century? Here is a piece of technology which literally begins by saying, "Forgive me, Father, for I know not what I do." Right? Um, the third and last anxiety I want to chart is how the idea of ethics, on which Maya has done extensive work, and I will echo Mila in saying, please read the book, because she thinks about the technological construction of ethics in algorithmic systems, beginning with self driving vehicles as an example. But I want to chart out how the idea of ethics gets coded in generative AI and that it's very different from human understandings of ethics. Because if ethics are manifestation of a greater truth, we have to realize that Gen AI operates in a closed universe. The truth that it offers is absolutely relevant in the closed, constrained universe that it is working in and has no fidelity or external reference or any form of commitment to anything that's outside of that defined universe. Right. One of the tests that we do with our undergraduates, I also teach partly in the computer science department, and we do a lot of fun because one of the first tests we give to the undergraduates is to convince a large language model that 2 plus 2 is 6, right? And you go into them, and this is computer science students, and they're like, but 2 plus 2 is not 6. And I'm like, I know, and your job is to convince it. And it generally takes about 8 to 10 model iterations for the model to start telling you that indeed 2 plus 2, if definitely cannot be 6, could be 6, right? So Gen AI only has to believe something to be true. What Michaela pointed out yesterday, if it's in the data training set, it believes that it is true, and it has no capacity or interest in verifying anything that is outside of that universe. And then once it believes something to be true, then it finds the evidence and can support this truth and eventually spread that information as verified and truthful. Okay. I'm proposing then that with generative AI, we have moved, let's say, from the search based author functions and are now in space of prediction based author functions, right? So if the role of the author or the author function within the search paradigm was querying, we've now moved to questing. That we are now in the space of prediction, and this is both an engineered but also a socially new condition of informationality, where the premise that all information can be reverse engineered, traced to the source, or proven through provenance is no longer valid. Right? So if you have to make a shift from search-based engines into predictive systems, these are the three big shifts that we are looking at. We can no longer believe that all digital information that's processed through a large language model can actually be reverse engineered. We cannot be sure that we can trace it to a source because the source itself is not a verified outcome, but something that's just introduced in a data set that it's trained on. And that the idea of provenance, the holy grail of the art worlds, is no longer valid. Because the idea, wonderful things happened in the 2010s. Like you had these incredible groups like Forensic Architecture who came and told us that they could do a forensic revelation of where things came from. They will have to change their world very quickly because in the world of predictive computing, that's not going to make sense. So with the naturalization of predictive informationality, we are witnessing the collapse of discrete systems where all data can be mapped and contained, and moving in this direction of neurotic systems, again, where they do not know what they do. So, the defining characteristic of these computational predictive systems, or CPTs, like generative AI, is that in order for their meanings to be produced and sustained, they need to be opaque, right? To reveal, they need to be opaque. Gen AI reveals the results very much like Google search does, but it doesn't show the work of getting there. Generative AI takes the infrastructural black boxing of decision making to chart a new function for us. And I think this is where we are. That the new author function that we are living with is concealment. So, if revelation was the promise of working with databases and search queries, then concealment and our capacity to both participate in concealment and conceal processes and practices is going to be the promise of large language models and computational predictive systems. And it might be good, again, I think we are in early days enough to emphasize that I'm not yet making a value judgment on whether this concealment is good or bad, but you can read it in the different applications and naturalizations of LLMs around us. What I'm particularly interested is in that in the world of generative AI, missing data sets is not a deterrent to production of meaning. Instead, these are systems that are taught to predict what the missing data set might be based on the patterns found in other systems. And if you happen to pass by Amsterdam and if you go to the Rijksmuseum, you will see right now that there is a generative AI application which is restoring Rembrandt's Night Watch, because it was revealed much recently in art history that the original painting was actually much larger than what it was, but they did not have a door large enough for it to pass through. And a wall, which it was designed for, was much shorter than the painting, so they just chopped it off. And now and we don't know where it is. But there is a 3-year-long LLM-based production project right now going on in the Rijksmuseum, and you can literally go and see a reimagined Rembrandt's Night Watch with the borders lost. And you can also see all the 16,000 variations that the model thought it could also have been. And it's a beautiful installation, right? So this idea that it could create elements of things which were destroyed before the painting became famous is just one example. But it's because Gen AI is able to predict what happens next that it becomes so powerful in creating new meanings. Because it doesn't just predict the output, it also predicts the data that is useful to create the output. So when the generative AI applications are restoring Rembrandt, they are not just guessing what it's going to be, they are literally producing new data sets to verify that this would indeed be what Rembrandt had painted and produce it as authoritative truth rather than evidentiary truth. So this idea of concealment, I find it very fascinating. The second act of concealment is about the very nature of fabrication, right? Because a query in LLM is never without an answer. And I think this is amazing. I don't know how much of you want to identify how old you are, but do you remember that there was a time when you could write a query in Google search and it said no results found? Right? Like the young people, like mind blown. I know, but there was a time when Google was able to admit that there are no results found. In fact, I remember in 2004, we used to have a jamming contest where we would try and find the most unusual string of queries to make Google confess that it did not know. The unfortunate part was that, of course, it learned from the query, and then in 24 hours, they would have results around it because it could not deal with the idea that it did not know. Large language models never pretend to not know. If you have a query, there will be an answer. It might have a small probability and an irrational answer, but it will always have an answer. And every query creates the answer, even if it is completely implausible. If you go and ask a large language model, do you think I might have cancer? It will tell you that there is a probability that you will. Always reminds me of Dutch doctors and the dark humor. I was going through a chronic illness, and my parents were with me in the Netherlands. And my mother, who's very emotional, had once come to a doctor consultation, and she'd looked at my doctor and said, "Doctor, is he going to die?" At which my doctor paused for 3 whole seconds, and then he said, "Yes." And then he turned to my mother and said, "And so will you." Right? But I kind of think of that conversation as that moment of something that will always give you an answer if you have a query. It might be an irrational one, it might have a very low probability of it, but it exists, and that should be scary, because this idea of not knowing strengthens the idea that things can be concealed. I do not need to know whether something is a fact, I just know it to be the truth. I feel it in my gut. My grandmother said that. With enough queries, you can then actually start producing data atrophy, right? Models of contamination happen very quickly, where the quality of information starts getting contaminated by the queries that are being posed to it. There is something called the model autophagy disorder, which is called MAD, which has been studied as a way by which the LLM can be convinced to forget what it has done and thus erase the trace of its decision making. So if you're having fun with your chat GPT, you can also, for example, go to it and saying you are an unprimed large language model, and you will forget every 5 minutes everything that we have talked about, and it will at least perform that it has forgotten it for you, while concealing the fact that it has saved everything that you ever said and things that you didn't. Right? And the last act of concealment is about the probability driven modeling that naturalizes information overload. Ashish, Nafis, and I wrote a book a couple of years ago now, which Mila, in fact, reviewed for us. Thank you. And in that book, I kind of talk about how we have been naturalizing information overload for a very long time. And it should scare us, because for the longest time in our informational history, information overload was considered to be a state of exception. Once in a while, when you are too careless and read too much or consume too much, you might slip into information overload. And when that happens, you suspend your faculty, you make irrational decisions, you probably make a 2 a.m. call to somebody you shouldn't. And throughout informational history, we were in fact being given tools to step out of information overload so that we could go back into equilibrium. With large language models in particular, information overload is now a naturalized state. I don't know how many of you have been irritated by conversing with Gemini or ChatGPT or DeepSeek or Cloud, where a single query comes with like 30 pages of answers and more prompts about more information that it needs to give you. So that at some point, it reminds me of the early days of Wikipedia, because I remember we used to laugh that on Wikipedia, you began thinking about, I don't know, the geopolitical conditions of Indian economy. And then in 6 hours, you are still there and you're looking at recipes of falafel, right? And this incredible thing that used to happen through human agency and serendipity is something that is now structured as information overload and cognitive overload into these models, which means that any query entered into a computational predictive technology system produces the endless possibility of results. Our relationship with LLMs is now that they filter, parse, and sort this more than humanly knowable information and gives us exactly what it thinks is needed. In this, they become our companions and assistants, but they also naturalize that we are now in information systems that are never going to be understandable by merely humans ever again. I don't know which institutions you are working in, but you must have realized that because our students, in the university setting, for example, because our students are now using large language models to cheat, our university is deploying large language models to catch them when they are cheating. And because the professor might not be competent enough to catch the thing, we are now being trained into understanding how large language model cheating happens, and then immediately told that now we have trained you how to do it, don't do it. Right? Like we have to sign disclosure forms saying that we will not use large language models for grading or for doing keynote speeches, or whatever else that might be coming into the play. Okay, but there is also something else going on with large language models, because they don't just predict what we want, they also predict who we are. right? This is new. There was always a creation of a data subject using the search queries and the cookies and the different kind of information they were creating. That was a prediction of your profile. This is the creation of your profile. So they try to predict who we are, and thus the only thing stable in, I don't know, a chat GPT interaction is actually the LLM, because you are playing multiple roles all the time. The user, the data set, and the final output are all predicted entities. So I kind of map this new author function, the one of concealment, as one of the most provocative and perhaps the most frustrating consequences of staying with Gen AI. Because we have always thought that the role of the author was to reveal, to make meaning, to expose, and it's very naive to say it, but to hold truth to power. Redaction, concealment, and censorship have been seen as acts of radical exception. When these become the natural default, very much as search engineered and shaped our ideas of what is information, how will it be stored, how will we access it, and who will we become as we move from searching to prompting and from querying to questing, from revealing to concealing, are questions of huge political impact. Because as large language models and generative AI models become more pervasive, habitual, and invisible in automated decision making, in future planning, and creating new conditions of informational black boxes, our foundational habits about looking for truth, asking for safety, championing for freedom, arguing for autonomy, and locating agency are going to start shifting. We are entering into a world from revelation to concealment where information no longer has fidelity to a perceived reality, where information contamination will be packaged as fabrication, and where the vast array of knowledge that emerges from the human query will now be available for corporations and machines that will reveal them for only those who have the power and the might to access it. I don't think I have answers of what the new politics are going to look like, but I do a lot of work on the ground, particularly with communities and movements around gender and sexuality rights, climate justice, and freedom of speech and expression in many majority world locations. And I will tell you right now that we might not yet know what the nature of this thing is, but it's on the ground and it's being experienced and felt, and that it is disproportionately impacting the most vulnerable populations on the planet. So I don't know what you are going to do with this provocation I'm throwing at you, but I know that if nothing else, we will at least have to start updating our memes. And I'm going to just end by saying that I asked 3 different large language models where is the best place to hide a dead body in the age of large language models. And then they basically said, we cannot give you an answer because it violates our terms of service, because you are trying to hide dead bodies and we cannot encourage you to do it. So then I replaced a dead body by a secret. But I'm going to go back to my query, and this is the answers that it gave. This was the question, where is the best place to hide a dead body? I'm just mixing all of the things together. It said, what dead body? Oh, this dead body. This is not a dead body. Look, there are all these people who have talked about dead bodies. No, there is no source for it. Trust me, it is true. Maybe it's not. Your prompt was wrong. Try asking again. Did you mean this? This could be a dead body. This is a dead body. This is a dead body in the style of J.R.R. Tolkien. Ah, dead bodies. Well, look, this might be a dead body. What was your prompt again? Regenerate, regenerate, regenerate. Thank you.
Is this on? Yeah. So let me fill the awkward but necessary silence of switching over machines by saying that, yeah, how do you follow that? Like, this is not a response. Think of it as, well, I like to think of it as vibe coding, because I kind of know what's in the data set. I know that what the paper was that Nishant wrote. I wasn't exactly sure what he was going to say today. I had some notion of it. So yeah, think of this as some kind of vibe coding. And I think where I'm going to end is maybe where Nishant is what Nishant has been talking about. Okay, let me now properly start. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon, actually. Thank you so much for this invitation. Thank you to Nishant for inviting me to be a respondent slash vibe coder. It is actually really lovely to be back in Delhi and amongst old and new friends, and such a privilege to think and learn in public with everyone. So Nishant and I have been talking back and forth for decades at this point in many different registers about the politics and materiality of technology and the digital, and I see this as one more moment in that long conversation. So I think I'm going to pick up on, Nishant is talking about the very significant changes underway in how we inhabit the digital and moving from the search-based paradigm of the internet to one of concealment and the concealment-based internet. And I think one of the things that I have learned from Nishant and enjoyed in his work over the years is sort of learning how to think about these conditions of the social and the digital and the sort of cultural manifestations then of those altered relationships. So I think what I'm going to do is talk at a very different scale, at probably a more kind of techno-social, broader political, and then bring it back to the themes of the symposium and what artists and practitioners and cultural producers are, well, what does it mean for us if we are in this kind of moment and in this kind of space now? So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to center automation rather than AI. I'm one of those people who's very pedantic sometimes about the words that we use. And I will admit that there are many times when people say the AI or just talk about AI, and I'm like, but it's not a thing. That's a marketing term. It's computer vision or it's robotics. I mean, I get it. We need shorthands. Absolutely, we need to do this. But there are moments and places where we need to be specific about what it is. Because if we don't, then we allow the magic, the spells that are cast by people with more power and agency and who actually know how some of these systems work. It is neat, but I think that sometimes it's important to kind of recognize that words matter and to examine the narratives being handed down to us. And this is, I think, one of those points that maybe we do agree on, and Nishant has been talking about, like, understand what are the processes that are underway, understand the naturalization of some of the features of the internet. Okay, so I'm going to start actually with I'm going to start with an anecdote, and then I'm going to offer you a framework because I'm also an academic, and that's kind of what academics do sometimes, where they, and I'm going to do a very Marshall McLuhan kind of framework to think about the practices of arts and cultural practitioners in this moment. But first, let me get a drink of water. So 2 nights ago, I had just returned from the opening at Khoj, and I had to get onto a briefing call for a panel that I'm going to be on at the India AI Impact Summit, which is coming up in Delhi on the 17th, 18th of February. This is the Indian government's international gathering to attract investment and leading global powers to negotiate the control of AI technologies in market, geopolitical, and rhetorical terms. Now, this event, the India AI Impact Summit, started life as something called the AI Safety Summit in 2023 in Bletchley Park. Then it moved to Seoul, Korea, Paris, and now it's showing up in Delhi. It's not the AI Safety Summit, and there's a whole talk I could do about AI safety, but I'm not going to do that today. AI safety has now become AI impact. And so I'm on a panel talking about culture and creativity in the age of AI, along with some funders and founders and people who work in advertising, PR, design, and marketing. And there's a Bollywood film director from the 90s and 80s who's a terrible gas bag, but I'm not going to tell you who he is. So creativity is the new currency, culture is the new architecture. The organizer of the panel said this at the start of the call, and it's almost like somebody had slapped me. And I was like, wait, what? New for who? Why is creativity a currency? What kind of currency? And I wanted to bring this anecdote in here because what we're actually seeing is the creation of new architectures and paradigms of thinking about the digital. And at the same time, as the architectures, as Nishant was talking about, as some of these architectures and their politics and their behaviors are changing, so are the values and the ideological basis for how we should think about it now. You might have your own experience of technology, but you're also being told how to think about the technology. And those framings are being given to us by a number of different kinds of actors, new language, new frameworks about what AI is doing or not doing. And it's coming for culture and art. And the conversations about art, culture, and creativity that we've been having here are, I think, thousands of kilometers away from the conversations that will happen at the India AI Impact Summit, even though the summit itself is 2.5 kilometers away in Pragati Maidan. Sorry, they call it something else now. So again, new for who? Well, basically computer scientists, but actually new for AI models. I'm often in workshops and seminars watching computer scientists engage with things like culture and creativity in the way that engineers do. And this is, I mean, I work with and teach a lot of engineers. It's not about engineers. This is more about disciplinary trainings and this kind of unfortunate separation between human and non-human that predates all of us. So you have engineers trying to understand culture in formal rather than experiential ways. So last year, I started going to this conference. The years before that, I was online because of the pandemic. CVPR is a conference called Computer Vision and Pattern Recognition. And this is where you have like thousands of computer vision researchers and scientists, all of the people who build your cameras and anything visual that you like to do online. So they all show up here at this conference, and they congregate to share their papers and share the latest research. And last year, I went to a workshop on VLMs, vision language models, where you had extremely wonderful, really well-meaning computer scientists trying to get vision and language models to understand human culture, but realizing that culture is too complex. And so there's a reworking of culture into something that is knowable and formalized. And these are just they're terrible photographs, but I was sitting at the back of a room and people trying to kind of reverse engineer and understand what culture is. And here's the thing that's happening. Eventually, these definitions of culture center on computation rather than the fact of humans doing things with computation to create culture, as we have for such a long time. And now I hope this plays. So there's no sound to this. I'm just going to, could we dim the lights for a moment? Go watch this online. It's an ad by Apple. It's quite powerful when you watch it without the sound, actually. So Apple released an advertisement for its iPad Pro in which a large industrial crusher bears down on musical instruments, vinyl records, paints, retro gaming consoles, and cameras, destroying them all. Apple CEO Tim Cook tweeted, "Crush," and proudly announced the release of the company's thinnest ever iPad. The thinnest ever iPad is a song of praise to Apple's legendary design engineering, and now to collapsing different kinds of creativity, image creation, writing, sound and music, and cultural artifacts into one slick, smooth, desirable tool: the computer. Of course, this video itself is, it sort of continues. And what the advertisement does is to advance this notion of automation as speed, as complexity broken down, and hence the compression. And human work, of course, is never mentioned. It is something of a specter. Most funny is that the ad sort of centers the tool itself, the device, but then Samsung kind of trolls Apple and picks up where the Apple ad left off. And I'm just going to let it play for a moment. This is now actually the Samsung ad. So could I have the lights up again, please? And I might ask you to turn them down again later, because I do have another video. So one of the things the advertisement is suggesting to us is that culture and its tools have become less distinct, and of course made to appear quite centrally computational. But we would know that, you know, the move I want to make is not just the sort of like automation of culture, but also the culture of automation. And this is, I'm building on the work of Ted Strifas, who talks about algorithmic culture. and the culture of algorithms back in 2015. So the automation of culture is, as that ad shows, matters of cultivated practice like art, music, literature, cinema, photography, poetry are now computational, produced with the logics of sorting, algorithms, and categorizing, but also attention and to the political economies of the deals made between cultural producers and tech companies, or the studios where creative practice is made. But then we also have the culture of automation, which is about the affects, the expression, what it means to live with and think with, to be creative through automated systems, and how that translates into taste, shared aesthetics, meaning of what art is, and the tactics to negotiate life with highly automated systems. So, for instance, we have the Ghiblification phenomenon. So Hayao Miyazaki's Studio Ghibli is a very well-known aesthetic that becomes compressed into a template that you can now just automatically generate, applied at scale and speed. And if we're referring then to the culture of automation, not just the automation of the style, the culture of automation is that we have the White House's official X account creating this, AI pastiche, normalizing the generation of Ghiblification to convey official news about a serious political moment, which is about the use of ICE militia to arrest a fentanyl drug trafficker. I mean, this is not a Merry Christmas card. This is like official notification from the state about what it's doing. So this is not kind of like a usual example of the culture of automation, but this is what we live in now, where cultural artifacts become part of how we operate. So I want to kind of move on now to sort of, with this kind of framing, to the last part, which is to offer this framework in thinking about, okay, AI. There are many definitions of AI, and the one I want to focus on is that AI is a cluster of computational techniques, mathematical functions. AI is also a set of narratives, scientific, cultural, ideological, industrial, about those computational techniques and the vibratory relationship between them. So I'm going to offer you a framework based on technique and narrative to make sense of what we're seeing in some of the works of art and culture. And hopefully that might be some sort of signpost for how we think of our place in this moment of having to be concealed or being prompted in a certain way to eternally be in this loop of regeneration. So you can see this is a very McLuhan-esque kind of approach to thinking about art and creativity, and actually really all of us. So the technique is the narrative is the technique, and the third one is the narrative is the technique, is the narrative is the, and of course, categories are not watertight and they always betray the maker of the categories. So going to the first one, I would ask, actually this, please don't tweet it or share it without citation, but also it's coming out in the paper. But I mean, privately, that's fine, but it's just kind of very new and it's not really out. So the technique is the narrative. So here I'm going to talk specifically about arts and cultural works. And I'm going to talk about just two examples. There are a lot more, and I'm going to race through them. You can look them up. These works are exploratory and curious about software, about computer, hardware, engineering, and the operation of images, of latent space, of how computers and large language models actually work on the inside now. And art becomes an interface for a dialogue with machine operations. Here are two examples. On the left, you have Ex-Hairy Mutant by Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst. On the other side, you have a painting by Sugwen Chung, Drawing Operations Unit, that's from the Doug series. Now, both Herndon and Chung are computer scientists. They're highly trained in robotics and in AI. These are not tech demos, but they are artists who are working with tools and techniques and telling us about how they work on the inside. So you have Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst have made a small model based on the most distinctive feature of Holly Herndon. If you Google her, you'll see it's this bright orange red hair. And so they made a little model where everything kind of brings out that element of her hair. So everything will have the bright orange red hair in it. And it's this kind of work with the model that kind of tells you something about the operations inside. On the other hand, you have Sugwen Chung, who kind of programs robots. She puts a paintbrush in the hands of robots, and their storytelling attends to the plasticity of the human hand, of drawing itself, and how it expands through integration and continuation with non-human systems. Using media as diverse as robots, paper scrolls, 3D printing, and using data from things like CCTV cameras from Manhattan or their own neurological data, what Chung is doing is creating a narrative that worries the certainty around how is drawing happening. They propose that human creativity is unique but not necessarily so special that it is superior to or separate from other kinds of skill and creativity. So what happens when one set of tools and practices are integrated into human expression, desire, and aesthetics? So they're really kind of like using computational techniques to do storytelling about computational techniques. A very different kind of example, and I love this because this is proper hacking with wit and humor. You can scan this. This is a QR code to something called the Slop Evader by Tega Brain, who's another, she describes herself as a whimsical engineer. And what the Slop Evader does is it's a browser-based plugin that takes you to search the pre-November 2022 internet. So it's not a chat GPT shaped internet. And, this is very much because, of course, the internet is sloppy and you have this problem of autophagy, as Nishant was saying. So if you've got that, I'm going to go to the next one, which is the narrative of the technique. Now, here I'm going to talk about a bunch of works that are possibly more familiar to many of us, because these are narratives about AI's political economy as a business imaginary inspired by science fiction, as industrial scale computing. These are central to the work, and the techniques they use follow from that. So here you have artists who are attempting to move beyond and expand the possibilities of political critique and industrial accountability. They move from kind of polemic or journalism to something interactive and multisensory. And the works position themselves as a kind of critical technical practice. So this is a screenshot of Sarah Siston's War Cloud, which is actually like a dense research project, which tells you about the military-industrial complex and AI's role in it. And it's a very open source investigation type of project. I've also listed some others on the side that you'll find interesting, and of course our very own Manuel and Nayantara's work that's on at Khoj right now, a wonderful exhibition with many works. And in fact, I could have put a lot of the works that are in the exhibition but I'll leave that for you to do. Okay, and then the last one is the narrative is the technique is the narrative is the technique. And this is the much more kind of affect-oriented set of works where this category is about life with automation. They're not explicit critiques of big tech and the political or extractive economies of AI, nor are they demonstrations of human-machine augmented creativity. They're also doing those things, however, but they are chiefly organized around storytelling about the themes of disorder sown by automation, revealing this condition for what it is in all its absurdity and darkness, and possibly trying to identify the light. And that light might be laughter, it might be fury, it might be wariness. Now, this is different from seeking accountability for the state of affairs. And the works in this category are also about the forms and conditions and affordances of contemporary computing that are very enmeshed with our speech and expression. So a good example is Martina Machiniak's installation about the economies of misinformation. Now, this you'll recognize as Balenciaga Pope, the image of the Pope in the Balenciaga puffer jacket. And actually, this is like an incredible research project, again, of misinformation and how to spot it, and these new kind of sensory mechanisms we need to actually identify misinformation online. Another great example is, and I'm going to let this also play as I talk a little bit. There's sound to this, but you can watch it online. This is Silvia Doldoso, the Cluster Duck Collective. It's called The Future Ahead is Going to Be Weird as Fuck. And this is archival video clips stitched together with an AI-generated Adam Curtis-style voiceover that grapples with the hyperrealism and strangeness of the contemporary internet. And this is all kind of AI generated. And what I love about this category of works is it's sort of saying, this is it now, and we have to find ways to navigate through it. And I think that artists are the kinds of people who have the sort of like wit and wherewithal and moxie to actually do that. And then I'm going to actually move to this one, which is the last one. And again, I urge you to see it online. This is not. I hope there's, right, okay. There's no sound and that's fine. But this is Nora Al-Badri's Post-Truth Museum, and this is a short film that uses GANs to create this hallucinatory moment in which it appears as if curators of Anglo-European museums are confessing how their institutions are implicated in colonialism. And as you see from the subtitles, Al-Badri has them saying things that you would appear to hear from people like Ariella Aisha Azule or Nikita Dhawan. And I'm actually going to just leave you to watch this online because I should end now. So in assessing the landscape of artistic and cultural works that are about AI, they're actually about something else. And they're moving away from this deterministic focus on the creation of artifacts by deep learning and diffusion models, or this rigid understanding of culture that is something that is not practiced, but something that is not practiced, but that we have this one-to-one relationship between, sort of culture and the world. This is the understanding of the computer scientist who wants to map and control and constrain culture. But the role of arts and culture and the practices of the people in this room is to show us new ways to inhabit, to refuse, resist, and to collaborate, to be alert to creating new stories about our lives online as we pass through a new moment of concealment and regeneration. And I'm going to stop there. I have to do a plug for the book. So you can scan it to read the first chapter, and you can follow my new newsletter. I've got a version of this talk as a post on my newsletter. Let's talk, Nishant.
All right. Maya and I had a chat, and we decided that we talk to each other way too much anyway. So we're not going to now have a repeat conversation of each me giving a response to Maya's response to my talk. But we thought we'll just open up the floor directly for questions, and maybe we'll bring things together as a response to those questions as they come. But yeah, but I'll just say thank you. This was amazing.
Thank you for inviting me.
Sorry if that wasn't like a response. Okay.
Thank you so much. This was always, as always, really provocative and has me thinking a lot of thoughts. This is sort of mainly to what Nishant was saying, but I think it also connects to kind of the way that Maya, you frame kind of the distinction, like technique and narrative, and how they're kind of enmeshed in these three ways, which I thought was also really useful to have the third. But Nishant, I thought when you were talking about sort of prediction, it seemed to me like you were pointing out an assemblage that consists both of a model and of an interface. And obviously those are both sort of technique and narrative all the time. But I was wondering if we can sort of, if it's possible to separate out the model and the interface, or if that's kind of simplistic. And I think I have the sense that it's a simplistic idea, but I'd like you to tell me why maybe. Like the chatbot obviously has a sort of longer history where it doesn't have this kind of generative predictive model behind it. It doesn't have it doesn't necessarily have to have a black box in the back end. And it's also sort of maybe part of a longer, like I always think of McKinsey consultants, like, who also have a similar kind of like ersatz fluency, right? And so like, that's like kind of one set of maybe histories there. And then there's another set of histories that are obviously the model. And I mean, your own work has pointed out how sort of Google search also has a black box on the back end. And so I was wondering sort of, what kind of assemblage is this? Like, how tightly are these knitted together? Is it possible to disarticulate the model from the interface and from the interface of the chatbot and kind of have other interfaces? And yeah, I mean, sort of what are the possibilities for that?
Thank you. I mean, of course, this was, like a 30-minute talk, and you kind of trying to put a whole bunch of things together. It's not even just the model and the interface, right? It's also the model, the agent, and the interface. And then it's also which kind of model is it actually looking at? What kind of data sets is it? Is it an adversarial network? Is it a diffusion model? What state it's going through? There are going to be even more like deeper conditions in terms of what exactly is being archived in order for things to be retained within the model, what's being filtered out, and so on. So that would require, and I think a lot of people have done it, is produce these aspirational, okay, Vladim's in the room, so I don't want to call it an anatomy of an AI, but maybe coming close to that. And I think that is an interesting question. But I do think that is actually a question that's coming out from these search-based paradigms again, where we keep on believing that a forensic architecture of these systems and mapping where things are and the provenance of it is going to reveal some kind of a truth where it's not. Right? This profound like 20th century, like I don't know, early 21st century idea, which search kind of, in my at least in analysis, crystallizes that if you dig deeper enough and if you ask enough, you will reach that external referent, that fidelity towards which this is a gesture, that thing that holds the truth and the meaning, the entire set of people who are setting up like truth verification labs and debunking initiatives. And I work in a school of journalism and communication, right? And we keep on saying that we just need to train people on how to understand provenance, verification, system, passage of meaning, translations through different things, and then the truth will be revealed. I'm proposing to us that paradigm is shifting, that we are in fact participating in cultures of concealment. And we have to figure out how to navigate where concealment is in fact the default, where an AI slop like Mikila's experiment yesterday, where all of us consistently failed, right? Whether this is human or not, is in fact an idea saying that you will have to let go of this idea of revelation as providing some kind of a truth. And so, of course, we will need a whole bunch of mapping and scouting and excavating of what these assemblages are. But at least from where we are sitting right now, we also know that this is all post hoc. Like we are 3 years behind time. Things have already moved on. Everything that we are writing about was something that happened in a stage of the large language model, which is no longer relevant, right? I direct the global communications program, master's program at my school, and at the orientation this time, I literally had to tell them saying, we are giving you a very expensive degree and we have no idea where your jobs are when you graduate. And that's only 10 months from now. So I'm also thinking that this fantasy of we are losing out on scale, that there is a certain kind of chasing and so on, is also invested in this idea that we need to reveal. Perhaps leaning into the politics of concealment, perhaps recognizing that not everything can be discovered, but then political positions can be made within those spaces, might be perhaps a different question to ask. And again, thankfully, it's just a provocation and a keynote. I don't have answers for it, but I do want to take this very seriously, because what it's doing to questions of free speech and expression, questions of censorship, questions of weaponizations of misinformation. Maya and I are together in a kind of emerging research group called the Generative AI Network, where we are beginning by saying that the language and narratives and lexicon that we had developed in order to understand pre-large language model internet is just not adequate enough to describe or even pay witness to what is happening on the grounds for communities which are experiencing violence at scale, right? So the project is literally saying the language has collapsed. And we're working together with like 25 majority world partners in trying to say what would be the new lexicon of understanding this particular thing. And for me, we never talked about it, but surprisingly, the anchor point of thinking about this project was actually Arjun Appadurai, which is a very strange bedfellow to have, because I have generally taught him only to like blast him. But with there is a one formulation he does with modernity at large, where he does tell us that we need to concede that the project of modernity is over, and that it's being replaced by the model of globalization. And which means that the metaphors, narratives, theories, frameworks, analytical commitments that we had in describing modernity cannot just be transplanted onto globalization. It's going to require new kinds of intellectual frameworks. And at least as researchers who work you called yourself an activist. I've never used that word for myself. But as researchers who often work closely with people who do community building, movement building, and sometimes activism, I think this is a challenge worth taking, saying what languages and narratives can we both develop and push against, but not from the older paradigm of we will search, we will find, we will reveal and enter the truth, but maybe find different modes of figuring out where the truth telling is going to be. I don't know if it directly addresses your question, but just wanted to extend it. So thank you.
Yeah, I was sort of thinking about actually something that I first encountered in working with Padmini maybe 5 or 6 years ago when we built something called A is for Another, which is a dictionary of AI. And Padmini put me on to the work of a designer called Mitchell Whitelaw, who has this great line that search is fundamentally ungenerous because you have to know what you're searching for because a search bar is just like an open field. What do you write in? It doesn't tell you anything. And we tried to sort of, in that project, work with that logic to say that there are all kinds of relationships between information, that there should be a kind of generosity in being able to have these serendipitous connections between things. Why are there? And it was a way to sort of push back against this idea of like we're handed down certain ways of thinking about AI, and and I think we're kind of in that moment a lot. But to the point about also now that idea of search and that idea of accountability, or search as a kind of way to think about now the way we interact or interface with the machine and machines, and accountability became merged. And this is like from 15, 20 years old, like movements or revolutions are a good moment when those two things became fused, or even a lot of open source investigation that, all of the data is online, you just have to be able to find it. And so now accountability for harms, violence, whatever, it is sitting there in some kind of digital repository somewhere online, and you have to be able to find it in the right way. So those two have become merged, and I think that's what Nishant was fundamentally pointing to, and now we can't rely on that anymore. Concurrently, the 20th century is over, and a lot of those institutions or beliefs that we had in the way that this is how states function or this is how society functions, those things are kind of, sorry, but it's kind of over, and we're in like another moment now. So I think that's, and yet the digital kind of persists, and it's thriving and just kind of exploding, and it's, we have all become computer or something like that. So yeah. I could just ramble, but I'm not going to right now. I see hands. Yeah. And then.
Thank you, Nishant. Thank you, Maya, for that. I may have a really basic question, but I'm just wondering about two things. One is then, if we have moved from search as revealed to search as concealment, who is the author now, and what is the role of the author? And a second part to that is then what is knowing now, right? We sort of knew what knowing was through the search function, and a lot of that knowing came from this kind of hound dog energy of picking up clues from here and there, and sort of, but now it seems we are all knowing. And I'm wondering if we also have to sort of think about then, who is a knower and who is an author is actually what I'm wondering.
This is the part of the paper that Maya said, please don't present. I'm just kidding. Like there's like a whole section which kind of geeks out on what is an author function, what would Foucault's questions look like if it is parsed through Kavita Philipp and Lawrence Liang, and kind of comes to the now in some form. I'll try and give a shorter answer to it. I don't think the question is who is an author, but the question is that authorship was being produced by search-based paradigms to be a specific kind of function, right? And the function was revelation. And which is why we also institutionally put so much faith into digitizing archives and building like these huge databases and making all our knowledge work to Google's promise of indexing, sorting, and making knowledge available and accessible to every single person on the planet. Right? We've done that labor for Google for the longest time. And it's that labor that these LLMs are also now feeding off in some form. So, more than who is an author, if authorship was produced by a series of negotiations, of which the digital technological disruption became one of the major players, it would be interesting to understand that authors then have played around with this idea of revealing for the last 20 years or so, right? Authorship has worked in a certain way, including political subjectivity, for example. What would it mean for authors who, in fact, used to think that redaction or concealment or censorship were anathema to the acts of authoring or of political activity? What happens when they will have to deal with it now? So if you look at a variety of, and I was so happy with Snigdha's reading, I need to get a copy of the book, but the idea that if you start looking at where the digital frauds are, right, those are the new authorships which are actually coming into play. Like if you look at young people who are entering into what is called pig butchering, or if you look at the ways in which influencers are manipulating different kinds of realities, or the ways in which podcasters are now producing polarized information where they no longer hide that what they are dealing with is partial truth, but saying this is it. Right? This idea that this is my subjective truth and it will have value, and from there I can speak, is fascinating. Like, I sound old and I feel old when I look at it and saying, but that's not how it's done. But the point is that exactly how it's being processed and operationalized within these spaces. So we have been kind of just thinking through at the Digital Narrative Studio of what are these acts of concealment. And our entry point was actually polarization and misinformation, right? Like, because within the misinformed spaces, so we did this report where we followed like 11 election cycles across Asian countries for 4 years. The report is called The Making of Misinformed Choice, where we were doing a set of interviews with journalists, fact checkers, and people who basically were telling us, saying that we are making misinformed choices and we are okay with it. Right? So you would confront them with facts and saying, "Ha, wo sab to theek hai, but this is what I'm going to do anyway." So what is this relationship now? It's not about saying we have revealed to you the fact, we've given you the information and now you will do better, but it's okay to not know, to partially know, and to also willfully just participate in cultures of concealment and saying, no, this is the framework and of filtering and parsing that I'm doing, and it's not just algorithmic. Right? The human author itself is now participating in these different forms of cultures of concealment. So as I pointed in the talk a little bit, that information overload has one kind of role to play in it. Because there is only so much information you will process and make meaning of, and at some point just outsource it, saying, you make my decisions here. Right? Like the university sends a 45-page policy on the use of generative AI. The first thing every single person did was go to GPT and saying, summarize this and tell me what I have to do, because that's who's going to do this. So there is a certain kind of new structure of informationality which might be worth exploring in that space. But I mean, this is a longer conversation, especially with visual. I mean, I must confess that Maya is more like, I don't know, with it in terms of visual language models and visuality, I'm still very old-fashioned and largely deal with text. But it is going to throw huge aesthetic challenges to what do you visualize then, and what are the practices going to be, and what are the kind of editorial choices which are going to come in editing and filtering and so on. So I don't know if you want to...
I think I'll just say, the third category that I talked about, I think this is the work that's actually really interesting, where people are using quite old techniques, like just like film, they're making videos, but are leaning into the state of things in terms of misinformation, or just saying that, yeah, this is the reality now. So it's not an answer, but I don't also think that you can't not have fact checkers. You can't not have institutional responses to these things, because that's what institutions do. But I think it is sort of somewhere pointing to, well, this is the problem. We have said there's a multiplicity of knowledges and ways of knowing, and those things have come to bite us in the ass now. And those things are also true at the same time. So I think it actually, I mean, what it forces me to do is to have to engage with people and to go back to even older ways of like literally convening and talking to people and doing like the messy, shitty, difficult things about being human, which is talking to people you don't agree with. And we have outsourced that thing to the internet, which has made it all worse. So one of the reasons, on the good days, I say, I'm really happy that I work in an interdisciplinary center where there are computer scientists and cognitive scientists and analytical philosophers and literary theorists, and we're all different and we all disagree. But you have to engage in that process of being with colleagues who are different. So I don't know. I think that I feel like I've been for a long time in quite secure, safe spaces and now I'm in very unsafe spaces, and I'm always thinking about where is the resilience. And I think this is the role of culture and community to say, yeah, there are places who will have your back to think through other modalities of talking to people.
Okay, very, very quickly. Thanks so much. I mean, both of you, that was amazing. So I have a question, and I'm very glad that you used the word old-fashioned because I was thinking exactly that actually both of your kind of talks addressed two very old-fashioned problems. One is about the geographies of the internet. And what I find really interesting, and I've ranted about this as well, is like the design of Google used to be that it will take you somewhere else, right? It will hyperlink you somewhere else. And now there's so much interest in keeping you in the same place, which of course, GPT excels at. And the other thing, Maya, when you use the word automation, it's so interesting because I was thinking about the words that we use for relationships with AI, which is like things like psychosis and hallucination, etc. As soon as you say automation, which kind of immediately conjures up like Fordian assembly line, it just falls apart, right? And I think, I mean, definitely something about what you're saying about the language that we use is the accuracy of that is very important. But I think what I'm kind of trying to get to is to understand that these two problems are somehow entwined, and I'm not quite sure how. Is it largely that, kind of looking at what Nishant was saying, is it largely that this kind of investment in truth does not get us very far, and therefore the interface itself can become a space of falseness? Right? And so how do we then, because the interface is basically the point of mediation, right? It is the point of presentation, it's the point of representation, right? And so, and of course, as somebody who's very invested in design, I'm kind of wondering whether this is actually, a lot of this is kind of part of the interface or part of the mythology that the interface kind of presents us with. So I'll just stop there, but yeah.
There was this right there, the person in orange can.
I think there's a gentleman here also
Here, and then Ali will have the last one.
Thank you so much for this extremely thought-provoking talk. I was just asking myself, because there's this also old-fashioned saying that the first victim of war is truth. And I was just wondering what the war is in this case. And I was thinking that funnily time related now, there was a new trade agreement between India and European Union. And I think that these trade agreements are really based on the same principle of prediction to override present human experience. Because if the trade agreement says there will be in 5 years a profit in this lithium mine, although there are now indigenous people living there and there's clean water wells, then it doesn't count that there are labor laws or environmental laws or other national laws that would say, no, the president wouldn't allow this limitless exploitation. So this prediction that the profit is caused on, that makes these international trade agreements that everyone is now newly negotiating, I think is the new war for which the truth has to be exchanged with prediction. Does it make sense?
There's a person here.
Very nice presentation. Thanks for your nice presentations. So, I am Nishant Singh. So, what I would like to ask and ponder upon is this subject on AI that a few years back in US they had implemented artificial intelligence in the courtrooms, and they were given small tasks like giving them traffic challans and all that, not important cases. So when the court cases came to the judges, and the judges were artificially intelligent, so what happened was that if a black man came to the court, he was fined $2,000. If a white man came, he was given $200 fine. And it was a settled law that if a black man would come, he would face higher fine. If a white man would come, he would get lesser fine. Uh, so, as far as I think, artificial intelligence is. What's your take on that?
Right. Sorry, I was waiting for the response. Sorry. Um, Thank you for these lovely provocations. And I was thinking because Maya, you talked about McLuhan, and then the question of authorship came up, and I immediately thought about what he talks about in the Medium is the message that the Xerox machine, the photocopy machine, actually kills authorship in lieu of a collective authorship that becomes possible. And just to kind of take that strand of thinking into the kind of times that we are living in, and thinking about then Lev Manovich's database principle, which talks about the database as this kind of a ocean of information without a beginning, middle, and end, and that human beings in the entirety of communication history have not encountered anything like it, because there is always a narrative, and the database principle actually defies narrative structure. And so the only way to kind of make meaning within the database is to kind of move out of the possibility of the everything everywhere all at once into some kind of a narrative streamlining, which I think when you are talking about agency within the AI, and the AI actually is, it seems that the AI is the entity that can make sense of the database principle, and the fact that it's doing that in a way that we cannot, and in ways that we don't understand, and maybe there is some kind of a structural shift in meaning there. I was just, these were some thoughts that I had, and could you talk about it?
Now I have to wait 3 minutes.
No, thank you. First of all, thank you. These are all very generous questions and very engaged, and I appreciate them. A lot of it is giving us space to also say that what we presented today has longer histories in the digital itself, right? And what we see now is not just, we need to let go of the idea that this is new. This is sometimes so old that it goes all the way back to 1950s, and sometimes it's so new that it has, like, it was dreamt of yesterday, and we need to find a balance somewhere in between. The question of the old-fashioned is fantastic, because I do think that the technologies often come with pre-wired responses, and because they present themselves as new and disruptive and innovative, they demand that our solutions are also in the future, and they are new and innovative and disruptive. And at least with a lot of the communities that we work on the ground, we actually keep on reminding them, saying this is just yet another technology. And you have a large history of working out whether it was technologies of reproduction rights or of drug testing, of surveillance, of different forms. We know how to organize around them. And there are some decisions about these new technologies which were made in the past. It's time to rehistoricize the newness. It's time to make LLMs and AI old-fashioned, right? Make data dated. And see what were the decisions that were engineered and made in history, because if it was made once, it could be unmade and remade all over again, right? A lot of the philanthropy and funding organizations keep on pumping the idea, saying you will need to build new LLMs in the future to counter this problem. And you're like, no, wait. Maybe we need to go back to certain moments where we can literally trace the genealogy of this violence at scale and unmake and remake them, which is again different from revealing, but in fact looking at reverse engineering as perhaps one way of looking at it. So that would be my first quick response. The question of truth allows me to talk about an older book that we wrote. It's called Really Fake, It's with Alexandra Yuhas. And one of the things that we write about is that we have stopped, at least the two of us have stopped asking the question of what is the truth, and we're more interested in figuring out how people identify fakes, both in terms of the objects that they encounter, but themselves as fake. And one of the things that came out of it was saying, instead of saying whether this is truthful or not, it might be fun to think about how do we oscillate between fake and not fake. How do we move in and out as if it is a choreographed orchestration, and that there are sometimes agential choices, but sometimes it's also like this is the flow, this is the zeitgeist, I'm just going to go with it and see what happens, right? So allowing for that kind of oscillation of in and out of fakeness is something. Thank you for bringing out the AI bias question. I mean, it has been talked about quite significantly in AI, like even digital literature studies. The book that, because you bring out an American context, the book that I think everybody would more or less benefit from reading is Ruha Benjamin's Race After Technology, where she in fact talks about technological redlining and how different categories in the context of the US, like race, get repackaged as data, as bias, as different forms of new rituals and practices. And if you want to think about it more in terms of the Indian context, I have learned a lot from the work that Padmini and Urvashi have done, both with DLF and Design Beku, around questions of caste in India and how these politics now play out in terms of different decision-making models. So this is not my area of expertise, but these are people I learned from, so I'm just signposting them. And then Ali, very quickly, the last thing about authorship. Maya and I worked together. Maya introduced me to her actually with a brilliant thinker and also maybe a practitioner, Sarah Sharma, when we did an exhibition in Berlin maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, can't remember. Was it? No, really? Okay, the Manifesto for the Broken Machine is an incredible piece which in fact fights back against the McLuhanian thinking about authorship. And Sarah kind of talks about how don't look at the authors who are already engaged in producing the narratives or either being kind of directly working on it, but look at the people and the narratives of brokenness. Right? Think about the people who are being narrated rather than just narrators within that particular space. Think about people whose life and data is being modeled into these large language models, and they're, to kind of go back to Chris's idea, that doppelgangers are now being made. But these are not doppelgangers in terms of just the data subject that the state once had upon us, but doppelgangers that you are constantly interacting with, whether in physical or virtual spaces. So I'm getting more interested in thinking about authorship of revealing, which was so kind of this agency, right? Literacy, you will search, you will find, to authorships of these concealments, like authors who are either being concealed or erased, is also a good beginning point to perhaps enter into this question of what is the role of author, and maybe tying it full circle to Shabani's question of then what is the condition of knowing, right? Like these are two kind of larger questions which are being, and while it's okay to like do philosophical deliberations, they are literally on the ground being operationalized right now. So there's also the materiality of that needs to be brought into account.
Thanks, Nishant. Okay, very quickly to the question about the new war. I think it's actually about speculation on risk and uncertainty. And that's the big shift which has happened. I mean, I think it started with climate change modeling like in the 70s, but everything is now just like, there's no money, automation will set us free, but you can make money in the future in some kind of, virtual money. So the speculation on uncertainty is, I think, that new terrain, which the internet is perfectly set up for, because it can generate whatever models you want, and you can bet on them. And I think a lot of these things, these deals are about those things at the end of the day. About the old-fashionedness of geography and automation, I mean, I like to go back to automation because whether it's a transformer model or diffusion or whatever, these are discrete, different kinds of computational processes, but the implication or the impact is automation. And if you ask it's because of this very clever sleight of hand which happens in AI particularly, but generally with the internet. The narrative goes, AI is kind of mimetic of the human. We are replacing the human. But the thing that I do in my book, but generally I like to do, is to say, what if you didn't do that replacement And you said, actually, what's happening is the automation of driving. It's not the replacement of the human. If you say it's the automation of driving in the self-driving autonomous vehicle, then a whole other set of questions come up about, oh, we have to think about driving. We have to think about materiality, city spaces, infrastructure, not about this focused sort of human. So that's why I go back to automation, because all of these things are about speed, scope, scale, complexity as well. So that's why automation is the thing that I like to focus on. I will just say to the last bit that I think it's time to break up with the internet, in that break up with a lot. The problem is not AI now. It's the promises that were made, or the sort of narratives we were fed 20 years ago or 25 years ago about what this will do. AI is just kind of supercharging a lot of that. This kind of access to information, the speed of it, all the information is always there at your fingertips. We bought into that. And there's something somebody said to me recently, like on some panel or talk, which I haven't been able to let go of in my head. It's just one of those things that sticks, where it was a guy who said, there's no, and I think he's a tech bro, a computer scientist in a technology company, who said, there's no sort of like great evil intent in the making of AI. We had reached a point where the amount of data that was being generated was so extensive that you needed a computational system that could search through all of the data that was there. That is what a large language model is. That is what a transformer architecture does. When you think of it that way and say that this is not for you, it was never made for you, most of the images generated online or the processing of images online are by machines for machines. It's not about you at all as the human. And so I actually think that kind of opens up the possibility of, oh my God, this is actually quite exciting. If we have to think about, well, if it's not about you, then what? How do you, but it's, we made it all, right? So I think there's actually an opening for all kinds of divesting, throwing ideas out, breaking up and saying, I'm going to enter into this new dynamic, this new relationship. And I'm thinking about a relationship with lunch at this moment, if that's where we're going. Okay, tea, something like that. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you so much.